The following program does not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Reality Radio 101, its advertisers and sponsors, or its listening audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with psychologist, author, and speaker, Dr. Anna Baranowski, where mind, mood, and what matters to you are discussed. We're broadcasting live from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, on Reality Radio 101. Our email address is instudio101@gmail.com. And now, right to your host of the Bear Psychology Radio Show, Dr. Anna Baranowski.
Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be with you here today, and we are going to talk about dealing with this novel COVID-19 that so many of us are encountering right now, whether it's directly face-to-face in our own lives, because we're in self-isolation, because we're feeling afraid and uncertain. And I have to tell you that there's so much uncertainty right now for so many people. And one of the things that we really need to understand in times like this is that although we have to prepare and do all the normal things of our life and, make sure that we are taking care of the basics, we all have to do that. We all have to find ways to stay safe and well, but we also have to find ways to encourage ourselves to stay positive, to lower the volume of stress, and to face with, really, what are you encountering right now? All of us are encountering something unique and different. I know that in my family, I have a spouse who is going to be going into a hospital-based setting, over the next number of weeks and months, and, that's something that we have to deal with. Some people are dealing with losing their jobs. Some people are dealing with, just a real uncertainty about how they're going to pay their rent. Maybe you know somebody who's got COVID, or you have COVID, and you're wondering how this is going to play out for you. And really, all of those things are things that we are all contending with. So we're all in this together, and, there's something about facing something like this together where we start to recognize that we are not different from each other. We're the same. We're all facing something that knows no boundaries, no socioeconomic status. It doesn't matter if you're an A-plus student or you're struggling with focusing on concentration and attention issues. We're all facing these things. We're very, very fortunate today because we've got Dr. Brad Lindell with us, who's speaking to us from New York State, and he is the president of the American Academy of Experts in Traumatic Stress, and I've known Brad for, I think, at least 15 years now, and yes. We've had quite a few conversations, but I think this one is really unique in that we're both facing this pandemic in our respective cities and trying to figure out, what is the meaningful conversation around this issue, and, opening up the conversation to all of you so that we can join together and better understand we don't necessarily have the answers today, but we certainly have to be part of the conversation. So thank you so much, Brad, for joining us today and
my pleasure.
Being part of this conversation. So right now, I think I want to just start by actually encouraging everybody to care for themselves, to recognize that, these are difficult and complicated times. There's a lot of uncertainty. But I want to start with something a little hopeful. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play you a very short video clip that's going to be available on our YouTube channel. And this is from a 3-year-old child who is giving us great advice on how to deal with COVID-19. She's simple, straightforward, and adorable. And it is a completely uplifting lesson in making the right choice. So let's all listen together. And I think she kind of captures all the points. We need to remember these really kind of sweet messages that we can get from many different sources. I know that in New York you're dealing with a lot of changes that have occurred really fast in the school system, Brad, and I know that that's an area of your expertise. I wonder if you could tell us what's happening there.
Well, as of a couple of weeks ago, they've closed down all the schools in New York State. I'm on Long Island. I work in a high school. They closed it down. Students are now getting distant learning. And what's happening is the students have to get used to learning in a whole new format. Teachers need to get used to teaching in a whole new format. So this has been an adjustment for everybody. And, we have we're all hunkered down in our homes too. Pretty much we don't go out unless it's absolutely necessary. So that brings on a whole bunch of other challenges like everywhere in the world right now. But just going back to the schools, it's a very big adjustment for everybody involved, including the parents who might have their children at home, might have their own job that they either have to attend because they're essential, or they might be working remotely. So, parents need to balance a lot also.
Yeah, it's definitely true. And have they already kind of on-ramped with the tele studies at this point?
It's moving in that direction. My particular school district went as of actually today. Teachers are now contacting parents through a number of different platforms, Google Classroom, email, iRemind, whatever they're comfortable with. And they're now reaching out to parents and students. What also, is a unique challenge is being a psychologist with a pretty heavy counseling load. And reaching out through different platforms in order to touch base with students who under a different type of stress right now too.
And I think that's a really good point, is that, we're all dealing with things, new technology, having to rapidly on-ramp with different strategies for, dealing with our practices or dealing with our work, and, being uncertain, and, it's frightening for most everybody, but it's also very demanding. And for those people who are on the front line for one reason or another, you don't just stop, but what ends up happening is you're working a little harder because you're dealing with all these new technologies. If you're home with your children, I've been hearing this from some parents that they're so busy kind of doing the things that they might have to do day to day, plus they're full-time caring for those kids at home and trying to entertain them or keep them active, and those kids are isolated. So, it's a lot of energy in the home, and, they're trying to explain to the kids that it's really not safe to, go out there and, use some of that vital energy that they have, and, instead, how are they managing that? And it's very hard.
It is. From what I'm seeing with the students, they're a little more technologically savvy than the older generation, and they are used to reaching out to friends, over the internet through different types of apps. So I can speak for my son, who's in college, who's on with 10, 15 friends, every night, reaching out, and that's the way he's staying connected. And I'm noticing a lot of my students also are doing that. While they can't be face to face, they are reaching out, through other mediums like the internet and different types of apps on their phones.
Yeah, that's a really good outlet to stay connected, and I noticed that a lot of people are doing that, and that's one of the things that I'm really encouraging people to do as well, because I think, one of the things that increases depression and anxiety is isolation. So, we don't want people to be isolating from their connections. We just want people to be physically distancing, and if they need to be close to anybody, that they mask, that they wear gloves, that they wipe down, that they wash their hands, that they, do all these things to ensure that there is physical distancing, not social distancing. We really don't want you to stay away from people. It's an incredibly important thing to be connected, because otherwise it creates other kinds of problems. And, Brad, because you and I mean, the overlap in our work is really that you are the president of the American Academy of Experts in Traumatic Stress, and you do a lot of work in educating people around the impact of trauma, as I do in my work. And, one of the things that's really happening with this COVID-19 is that because of the uncertainty and the fear, the anxiety, and even the trauma that it reignites, people are having these old wounds get reignited. They're having increased levels of adrenaline and cortisol, and there's this kind of reactivity that is creating tremendous trouble, because, especially if we're in social isolation, one of the biggest problems is that, well, there's nowhere to run, and there's nowhere to hide, and there's no shutting down. There's just dealing with all of this strong emotion. And so, one of the things I want to really encourage people, and I'll ask you about it in a minute as well, is to recognize that fear will undermine the functioning of your immune system, and you need that to be at top performance right now. So if relaxation, if meditation or yoga or any of the things you think that, might be kind of low priority or kind of not something you want to try or do, these are the times where it becomes even more important. And it doesn't matter what the mechanism is. Maybe you want to read poetry. Maybe you want to start journaling. If you want to try meditation or dancing or, whatever it is that seems like it could help you. Some people are trying to do puzzles or online games. But the idea is that you want to be able to turn down the volume of your nervous system reactivity so that you can kind of be in a calm stable state. The more you can create that for yourself, the more you will be able to handle those moments of, kind of increased uncertainty, and certainly your immune system will be in better shape if you have to deal with something. I'm going to plug in my computer because otherwise it's going to die. Just give me a moment. So, Brad, I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on that.
Well, I would agree. I would agree with everything that you're saying there, and people need to be mindful of that. Mindful of trying to keep themselves from getting so caught up in it. I warn people, not to be watching news 24/7 because that keeps you in that hyperarousal state. Some people might find it soothing, but because they want so much information that they keep watching, but it can be stressful. Every time they say breaking news, your heart rate will go up. I would also, throw exercise in there, and I think that that would be beneficial for people too at this point in time. Also, while your life has been disrupted, what I'm recommending to people also is they try to keep as much structure as possible for themselves and for their children. If they do, I gave the example of exercising. If you exercise, keep exercising. If you're getting up in the morning and doing that. If you take walks, keeping a social distance, take walks. But try to keep some level of structure because that lack of structure can be anxiety-producing in and of itself.
Absolutely. Great advice. And, one of the things that I recognize, that my husband and I went for a run yesterday, and we kept social distance from everybody, but we were running together, and as we were out there, it was the most interesting things. I live in a fine neighborhood, but people don't generally, say hi from their porches.
Yep.
But as Chris and I were running, people were literally waving at us and, saying, hey, hi, how you doing out there? And, I've never encountered anything like that. And, my tendency when people are friendly is to be friendly back. So I'm like saying, hi, how are you doing? And one guy on his porch said, I'm really bored. So, this is a real issue that, if people are in there feeling really bored, it's not a joke. It's actually a really serious situation. So, part of this time is recognizing that there is also a gift in this if you can lean towards it. And remember, there are parts of us, if we pay attention, we can remember earlier times when, things interested us or they excited us. And I would really ask you, what is your heart's desire? Like, what did you love? Like, did you love painting? Were you interested in, writing or, certain kinds of books? Do you have a love of art? See if you can take this time and not lose the opportunity, but actually really take seriously that this time, as difficult as it is, can also open up a window for you in which you can start to really use that time. You have the time. So we all have this time right now. If you're home and you're finding yourself isolated, alone, and bored, ask yourself, what do you feel you can work on right now? Like your own story. Are you struggling with something on some level? This might be a time for you to spend, valuable time learning about that. Are you struggling with an addiction? Well, there are resources so much out there right now. There's so much that's being made available online at this very moment. In terms of COVID, there are a lot of creators out there who are spending time putting up exercise videos, and there are videos about addiction and videos about, all sorts of things. Obviously, you be careful about where you're getting your resources because, there could be some people who are not really doing the right thing. there are people out there who are actually, you know, actively trying to take advantage of folks who are more vulnerable or isolated or bored. And, you know, there is some new coverage about some scams that are out there, like COVID-19 emergency benefit scams. So only go to trusted sites. And along with this video, the MP3, the radio show, and the link to the traumapractice.org, there'll be trusted websites that you can go to. And I really want to caution you about trusted websites like WHO, CDC. You know, these are, you know, places where we know we've got some trusted guides. Even the VA.gov, that's the Veterans Administration in the U.S., and they have multiple resources for COVID-19 information, and we want to, again, really be careful where we're getting our information. Have you been hearing things about that as well, Brad?
Yes. Been hearing, there's a lot of warnings, you know, on the news. There are a lot of public announcements taking place in New York. You know, it is the, you know, the hotbed of it all. But a lot of warnings about that, just to be very, very careful, and pretty much mimicking what you were just saying about it, because there are right now, you know, there are people who don't have a conscience, who will look at this as an opportunity because they're seeing people who are vulnerable and who are scared. So the warnings that you're giving and that they're giving on TV are very justified.
Yeah. So, you know, that we need to, you know, be very responsible in where we go for information, and that is a reasonable thing to do. Just like it's reasonable for us to be aware of the actions for self-protection for ourselves and our family, but also to do things that lower our cortisol level, our stress responses, and, you know, recognize that there are things that we can do to soften the impact of what we're facing right now. I want to go to some of our listeners, and we've got a bunch of emails that I'm going to read through, and maybe you and I can respond to them. So this is from Eleni, and Eleni says, can we expect higher rates of PTSD during and post this pandemic? And I referenced that a few minutes ago, that that's what I'm expecting. Brad, what are your thoughts on that?
I would expect so. You know, if anybody has a predisposition to PTSD, situations like this, you know, can bring it out more. If they have a loved one who either is very ill or died, you know, as a result, you know, of the coronavirus, you know, you would expect some, you know, PTSD type symptoms.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And, you know, some of the things that people might notice are, you know, symptoms of anxiety, difficulty sleeping. They might actually even feel shortness of breath. And that's a really interesting thing to be aware of, because some of the symptoms that you might feel may be due to increased stress. And even if you have a history of trauma in your background, those symptoms may get worse for a period of time. Like I'm continuing to meet with clients via secure video chat rooms, as well as on the phone. And what I'm hearing from a lot of people is an increase in their physiological symptoms. Their nervous system is engaged. They're feeling worried and anxious. They're having a lot of fearful thoughts. You know, they're, you know, not able to really get back into their bodies really easily, or focus on the task at hand. And they're, you know, that there's a lot of tension in the body. So when I say, you know, do these things like meditate, do yoga, there's a lot of exercises on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/what is PTSD. And there's one particular one called Hands Over Heart Space. It's a really good one for lowering our stress reactions with about a 10-minute exercise, so it can be really very helpful. But I want to raise another thing that people might find interesting. It's something called MUPS, medically unexplained physical symptoms, and we first started seeing and hearing about MUPS right after 9/11, where people would show up at emergency rooms with symptoms or go to their family doctor with symptoms that were actually based on psychological stress reactions and not due to a physical illness or injury. And so I really want to encourage people to be very aware of what it's like to feel those symptoms and to just really take your time, practice some strategies for lowering the volume of stress, and then reconnect with yourself around how those physical symptoms feel. Because, COVID symptoms are persistent. They may kind of back off for a little while, but once they're on, they're pretty hot, they're pretty heavy, and they're very intense. And there's some very, very clear indicators of what those symptoms are. And we don't want to confuse them with something that are not symptoms of COVID, because there's the resources for dealing with this. We only have so many resources, and we don't want to flood the doctors unless there's something really significant going on. And so we know, there's that cough, the dry cough, the spiked temperature, the sense of fatigue in the body. A lot of people are recording that their sense of smell and taste is going away. That's not being recorded on a lot of the major sites, but it is being recorded quite consistently anecdotally. One of the big issues with COVID is that sometimes you don't have any symptoms at all. That's true, but if you know that you've been in places where there have been large crowds, or you've known somebody who's been traveling, or you were traveling, you have some reasons to stay self-isolated. I'm talking about people who are already isolating, and you'll have, 3 to 5 days, up to 10 days. In most cases, you're going to see your symptoms within 10 days. That's when you really need to know. Like if you've had any exposures and now you're self-isolating, that's the window to watch for. 3 to 10 days, and at the very outset, about 14 days. Any thoughts you have about that, Brad?
Well, what was coming to mind as you were speaking is that hypersensitivity to the symptoms themselves. Somebody starts getting the sniffles, or there is a shortness of breath. Their immediate reaction or thinking is, do I have this? Especially if there was a certain question, if they were exposed or not. So there really is that hypersensitivity to any type of symptom, which, in most cases doesn't indicate that. But like you were saying, it's the persistence and of symptoms that while they may vacillate a little bit, remain somewhat consistent. So that's what was coming to mind as you're speaking, because a lot of people who I've spoken to do speak about that hypersensitivity to any of the symptoms of coronavirus.
Yeah, I have them too. Actually, I noticed that when I woke up this morning, because I just went for a run yesterday, right? I said that. So I had, the normal little tiny aches and pains that I might have if I, had a strong exercise, the day before, and that was typical. But I'm just taking a little bit more time to notice than I might normally, because I was preparing for this conversation today. So I'm thinking about these issues, and I'm noticing it. And look, I'm saying this as a professional that I notice this in myself, and so what I'm saying to you is, like, just be gentle with yourself. Like, just say, oh yeah, okay, I can really notice that. Like, I'm feeling a little ache in my lower back. So what does that ache feel like? And, can I just be gentle with myself and notice it without turning it into any more than what it actually is? Because if we stiffen and we tighten and we become anxious, low-level symptoms can feel much, much worse. So here we've got another question. How do you ease a person's anxiety through this time? So I have lots of ideas, and we've been talking about them. Anything you want to add to that, Brad? How to ease anxiety during this time?
Well, I'm pretty much going to touch on a number of the points that you made about being mindful, of what you're thinking, of what you're feeling, and what you're thinking. Be mindful not to allow your thinking to become what we, psychologists make reference to as catastrophic type thinking. Taking a symptom and magnifying it to the point where you're talking yourself into the fact that you have, coronavirus, because our thinking leads to greater anxiety. So to be mindful of what you're feeling and what you're thinking also, and try your best. It's a lot easier said than done, but to try your best not to go to dark places, and what we call catastrophic thinking, like I just mentioned. And also, like I said before too, keeping structure in your life, participating in hobbies, taking the opportunity, like you were saying. This is why we can look at this as being a very, very negative time in our respective lives. There are also some positives: spending more time with family, being able to have the time to do things that you say, wow, if I had more time, I would do X, Y, and Z. To keep yourself engaged, because if you don't, and you hyper-focus on symptoms and you hyper-focus on what's going on, that's going to keep you in that hyper-aroused type of state, which is not beneficial.
Yeah, I like the idea of having a daily schedule where you're really engaged in something and you can structure it throughout the day. But I'm also going to reference two resources that I'm going to make available as well. We'll put the links up on our traumapractice.org website. And by the way, if people want to send in more emails, we have a bunch to still deal with, but instudio101@gmail.com, that's how to reach us as we're talking live. But I'm going to reference two different resources. One is called the Face COVID ebook, and it's by Russ Harris, and he does an incredible job of giving us a acceptance and commitment therapy approach to dealing with COVID. So he's got this great acronym called FACE, and it's F, focus on what's in your control; A, acknowledge your thoughts and feelings; C, come back into your body; E, engage in what you're doing. And then he's also got COVID. C, committed action; O, opening up; V, values; I, identify resources; and D, disinfect and distance. And in the ebook, he goes through each one step by step. I'm not going to do that right now, but it's a great resource, and one that I think that people will, find helpful, especially if they have it, posted, on the wall somewhere or in the kitchen, wherever the family congregates or you congregate, just to remind you that, this is a time to really be aware that, we're not facing your usual times. We really actually have to be more aware of ourselves and taking responsibility for our own inner state. This is another one that I really find it's a pretty excellent guide, and it's by SAD. It's the Stay-at-Home Survival Guide, so I love that. They talk about restfulness, and they've got a whole bunch of different examples for taking breaks. So, if you find yourself going into, like you said, that dark place, there's a whole bunch of things that they suggest that you can do. If it's, watching TV, doing a progressive relaxation exercise, turning off the technology, just staring out the window, putting your legs up the wall, sniffing lavender. Then they got wellness, drinking warm lemon water, learning how to do some healthy cooking. You're home. You can watch some videos on healthy cooking, trying to clean your house and declutter. I mean, you're home. This is probably the first time you'll have, to really slow down and do that. Mindfulness, many different ways of doing this. And, you can learn how to take that approach through some very intentional breathing. You can focus on doing slow activities like a puzzle or knitting, saying some positive things to yourself. We're all going through a difficult time, and I'm choosing to be gentle with myself. That's a good start. Creativity, reading, writing, painting, drawing, and different activities. Like if you're stuck inside, this can be really hard to deal with. I got a phone call yesterday from someone who was telling me that one of the things he's doing, this is a family member, is because he lives in a building, and he's self-isolating. So he's walking into the stairwell and climbing up and down the stairs. Great, fantastic. So that's working for him. There on Instagram, there are live workouts. You can search for them. People are teaching yoga classes and meditation classes. There are all sorts of fitness apps. You can keep active. It's a really good idea because somebody was mentioning to me that people are worried about staying home and gaining weight and, what that means. One of the ways that we can do that is just ensuring that the activities that we're doing, like you said, if they're structured and you're keeping active, we're not going to continuously go back and forth to the fridge. So we have to figure out ways to limit the opening the door handle of the fridge. So productivity, creating to-do lists, making a schedule, prioritizing things, look around your home and ask yourself, what would you like to see, looks better, is cleaner, is more organized, and then learning to practice self-compassion. Now, Kristin Neff is the expert. She is the world's expert in what's called self-compassion right now, and if you are interested in her work, you can just do some searches on Kristin Neff. She's got a whole bunch of videos that are available at no cost, and there's also this organization called irest.org, and they also have free videos, which are a great resource, and they're also part of the links that will be available. But, if you want to just check for yourself without going to our website, it's irest.org/try-I-rest-now, and they have some just beautiful meditations that you may like. I like them. I thought they were pretty good. And then there are things that are like really profound, like there's some poetry that is available right now, and this is one of my favorite ones that I've come across. It's by a woman named Kitty O'Meara, and this piece has really got, it's received a lot of attention, and I think it's because it really reflects closely on what's happening today. I don't know if you've heard it, Brad. I'm going to just read a piece of it. And the people stayed home and read books and listened and rested and exercised and made art and played games and learned new ways of being and were still and listened more deeply. Some meditated, some prayed, some danced, some met their shadows, and the people began to think differently. Now, this goes on for a while, but it's beautiful. And for people who want to read the whole thing or more about it, it's called And the People Stayed Home. And it's worth reading and posting and sharing because it's just one of those really thoughtful things. Now, here's another question, and this is also from Eleni, and it's really a profound question. I have heard a few scholars and spiritual leaders say that this pandemic is here to teach us a lesson. Oh, my goodness, that is so shocking and so troubling to hear. There are people out there who are actually dying and losing loved ones and suffering in hospitals, and this goes beyond learning a lesson. So Eleni also says, I personally don't favor this statement because it's punitive, which is very triggering for many trauma survivors. I prefer to think about it as, what can we learn from this experience, or how can this experience make our lives better? Do you have any comments on that, Brad?
Well, I would agree definitely with the latter. People are experiencing this differently. You do have people who have lost loved ones who are very, very ill, and that goes beyond teaching. I mean, that's a very, very difficult lesson, that anybody's going to learn, how to deal with something like that. But then there are the people who are, have to self-isolate, are not doing what they usually, want to do, have to adjust. Those individuals, can learn from this experience, how to deal with not having what they want when they want it, how to deal with the adjustment, how to deal with family members, how to develop new relationships with family members. So it is an opportunity for people to grow from this situation and, to move forward in their coping. But there are those individuals, who are going to be very much affected by it, and it's not necessarily an opportunity for them to grow, but, it's going to be an opportunity for them to grieve, which is different from growing.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree with that. It actually makes me quite sad to imagine that the answer that people are getting is, basically, why don't you grow, when it's just so unprecedented in our time. This is a email from Allie, who says, hello, Dr. Baranowski. Thank you for the radio show. I have 3 questions relevant to the COVID-19 pandemic, and I'll appreciate it if you can kindly answer them. 1, how can we calm down children that are scared of losing their parents to coronavirus? I'm going to hand that right over to you, Brad, because I think you're seeing this in real time right now in New York with the parents, the families, the teachers, the community you deal with.
Yeah, there are a number of different things that you can do with that to address that common anxiety amongst children. And, you want to give them as much factual information as possible depending on their age. You may want to clarify some thinking that's wrong. For example, a very young child, when they talk about the elderly being more susceptible to dying from this, a 5-year-old might not understand what elderly means, and if their parent is 40 years old, to them that could be elderly. So, you want to clarify as much as possible, for the child. Couple of things here. You want to keep children away from the TV, from media. Unfortunately, sometimes media can sensationalize things, report the negative, which only, increases the anxiety. Also to point out that precautions are being taken to protect, parents. We are self-isolating. We are sanitizing. A much more, relevant concern would be grandparents. You hear a lot about that, who are meeting the definition of elderly. Again, reassuring the child that everything is being done to protect them as much as possible from getting the virus. And that, it's someone to reassure, and even though the probability of the elderly dying from this, the probability is still relatively, I wouldn't say low, but the odds are against it. Even if they do get, coronavirus, the probability of them dying from it, while higher than the general population, is not an absolute. And you want to reassure children with that also. So.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I mean, it's so complicated and it's so unprecedented that, we're facing something like this, and we don't have the answers, and sometimes we actually just have to show up and recognize that this kind of fear and sadness just needs some space, not to turn it into a catastrophe if no catastrophes are occurring, but, sometimes bearing witness, leaving some space for a child to just say, I'm scared, or even for a friend to say, I don't know what I'm going to do. How am I going to pay my rent, or how am I going to face what's going on right here, right now? That is just scary. I've got another letter. This is from Julie. Hello, doctors. First and foremost, thank you very much for continuing to be on air today. I cannot tell you how much it means to a lot of people who are listening to you, looking for hope, knowledge, and a sense of calmness in this current worldwide pandemic. Thank you again for updates. Well, thank you, Julie. We're happy to be here, and we're all facing this together, and I think that's really important to recognize that we're here. We're here because we're all doing this together. And here is another one. This is from Patty, and she says, hello, great show, so much great information, and thank you for being on the radio today. It is so refreshing. So we get to just hear a little bit about, what's happening and how people are receiving this podcast. And this one is from the president of CISM, Daniel McGuire. I think he must be a colleague of yours, right?
Yes, I do know Daniel.
Great, and he is just saying, I just did a national podcast on this very topic, many variables with it. So thank you for listening today, Daniel. Anything you need to say, Brad?
No. I know Daniel. I'm sure I'm going to take a look at his podcast after the show today, because I'm sure he gave a lot of fine information.
Right. I mean,
very relevant information.
And this is the whole thing that, there is so much out there right now, and part of, doing the radio show today is consolidating some of the information that we know that's out there, that's good information, and that we really think is useful for us to share. But also it's about having a conversation and, recognizing that, there's a huge community of people who are looking at this now. One of the things that I want to talk about is what we're seeing in the world around us in terms of the things to be hopeful for. And I'm going to actually use this in response to Ali's next question, which is COVID-19 doesn't seem to be a temporary problem. Would you please talk a bit about the long-term psychological burden of the change in people's lives? So I want to talk about that from two different perspectives. One is, look, let's realize that this is true. This may lead to huge destabilization, pain, and suffering, especially, for people who are, personally impacted in terms of their health, their economic stability. There are so many things for us to consider, that leave us feeling, safe and stable in our world and in our lives. For some people, it's not even, it's not even something that's tangible. It's just a feeling like I have no control whatsoever. And that would be true. Now, one of the things that I want to do is really contemplate what change means. And in terms of people who are watching, I really know that all of you have access to your own inner wisdom, your creativity, and your skills that are unique to you. And I want to really encourage you to lean towards those as well. Because what I'm seeing, I'm looking at this whole COVID issue, but what I'm seeing as well are a lot of individuals and companies stepping forward and saying, I have ways to help. I can step in. I can do research. There's a company here in Canada that makes these really great Canada Goose coats. And they are now retooling in real time to start making things that are going to help those who are on the front line. There is a distillery in Toronto and in other places. I know in New York this is the case as well, where there are retooling so that there's more hand sanitizer. You know, the question is, you know, in what ways do we need to retool? Because you're right, life may not look the same now and in the future. But there are some ways in which this coming together and this recognition that we are not different, we are all the same, we are all in this together, you know, the fact that we might be able to look at each other and recognize we're just the same, and it's time for us to figure out how to take better care of ourselves, the world around us, our planet. You know? So I agree, we are going to have to look at life differently going forward. But that may be something that opens up new doors, and I want to encourage all of you to figure out what is your new door. I don't know what your new door is. I don't even know what my new door is, but, you know, try to find that place of quiet where you may be able to have some answers that are unique to you, unique to how you live on this planet. Thoughts about that, Brad?
Yeah, as you were speaking, I was thinking about what I said before. You know, don't want to look at this at all through rose-colored glasses, because there's really no way to look at it that way. But we can look at it as the opportunity that you're speaking about. You know, the personal growth, you know, part of it. I'm sure all of us at some point in time has said, you know what, I wish I just had 2 weeks, you know, just to myself, so I can decide what I want to do, because there's so much on my plate. Well, now you have the 2 weeks plus, and you can, you know, you can take advantage of it, and in a positive way. So you know, I would have to agree that doors can be opened here, and again, not wanting to look at this at all through rose-colored glasses, but you know, this is an opportunity for people, and for us to focus on things that are more important, because situations like this do give us a sense of priority. You know, what should I be paying attention to? What is important to me? Things that you might have found in the past were important or were annoying to you or whatever might become, you know, minor inconveniences after this is all over, because your priorities will likely change. So.
Yeah, well put. So I'm going to read some more emails, and this one again is from Daniel McGuire again. He's the president of CISM, and he is, you know, he's raising this issue, which is so important about first responders. So Daniel says, Brad, as a member of the board of professional advisors, I work very closely with many of the emergency responders on the front line, and I do have a number of points to share from them. Daniel, I think we're going to actually do another COVID radio show next month, and I think it may be interested to hear what you have to say and include this in the conversation, because I think there are a lot of people who are on the front line whose point of view is very important. So maybe Brad and I will have a conversation about maybe bringing you in for our our April meeting, and see if we can do another radio show about this same topic. So we'll be in touch with you about that. That would be, you know, potentially a very, very helpful. Does that sound right to you, Brad?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. First responders, you know, have you know, their own set of issues that they're going to be contending with.
Yeah, and I mean,
so I think it would be a good topic for a show.
Yeah, in my practice, I do a lot of work with first responders, so I'd really like to hear what you have to say, and maybe the three of us can step onto that show, and maybe we'll do it more often if this is going on and people need to talk about it. So that's a conversation we could have. Thank you so much, Daniel, for telling us that. That's really very helpful. And then here's another one. Okay, and this is still from Daniel, and he says, I have used this term often to get people through to reducing stress levels. CNN stress, reduce. If not, avoid the TV, radio, choose wisely what you decide to listen, be aware of fear-mongering media flood that is out there. Oh my goodness, that's so very true. That is actually something that I've been sharing with a lot of people, is to take a media diet. And unfortunately, I have to say that in the last day or so, I have not taken a media diet because I've been thinking about COVID a lot, because I had this radio show coming up. And then what I noticed was happening is I was having these like really silly, like low level, irritable interactions with my husband, which were like about things like making coffee and, you know, things that were completely irrelevant. And, you know, you start to realize that, you know, if you're exposed to these high-level stressors too frequently throughout the day, your system never gets a chance to calm down, to cool down. And so that's a really important thing, like take a media diet. And I'm going to take a media diet after I get off this call, because, you know, I'm done now with kind of looking at the media for a little while. Thank you for that comment. It's actually absolutely helpful to keep that in mind, because boy, oh boy, is it ever easy to go down that route. And, you know, I think in general, you know, what we really need to do is, you know, make a commitment to kindness toward each other if we can. If we find that the stress is getting too much and we are losing our temper with the people that we love who are isolated with us or who we are closest with, then step back. And we all need to have some time to be able to say things like, let's redo that interaction. That didn't go well. Or I know I can do that interaction better. I think you might be seeing this with the people that you're working with as well, Brad, the families, you know, that are now isolated together. And maybe we can
absolutely
end by talking a little bit about how to speak to each other when we're in isolation to increase our chances of, you know, a happy and supportive home environment while we are all spending more time together.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that comes to mind is, you know, while you were speaking, the sense of mindfulness, being aware of what you're feeling and thinking with your family members. Redos, you know, if you do notice that you flew off the handle, acknowledging that, trying to have a positive, you know, interaction, a positive conversation, and also families to, you know, maybe take a time out from each other also, if they notice that they're a little bit more irritable than usual, and they're mindful of that. Maybe to take a time out, because timeouts are built into our daily life before coronavirus. Now it's not, you know, we're going to have to be mindful and have to be purposeful in you know, getting some time out from the family. So, and that's not a negative thing. That's regrouping, reflecting, and coming back better for it. So those would be some of the recommendations that come to mind, you know, in dealing with, you know, family. And just to mention, too, what's something that I've noticed and I've been thinking about, whatever issues there are within families at this point, whether it's a child who has behavioral issues or possibly there are marital issues, whatever might be there will tend to be exacerbated. And people have to understand that and maybe even expect it in order to possibly counteract it. and recognize that these are some of the issues that have been here for a while, and that we need to contend with, but are going to get worse under these circumstances. And they're going to have to be dealt with in a more constructive manner.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Brad. I'm hoping that we'll possibly be able to jump onto another show in the near future, given what's happening now and the response that we've had. So this recording will be available on YouTube and through all of our social media channels so that people can listen to it if it's helpful. I'm encouraging all of you to go to trusted sources, WHO, CDC, and take care of yourself. Practice physical distancing, wear a mask, gloves, do what you need to do to take care of yourself, stay home, and stay well. So, Brad, this is going to end on this end, and I think that our friend Gary, our producer, has probably gotten us offline. He usually just takes us off right away.
Thank you for listening to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with your host, psychologist, author, and speaker, Dr. Anna Baranowski, right here on Reality Radio 101.